Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Heller Career Development Center's Alumni Career Chats, where we're having conversation with alumni about their careers and everything in between. My name is Benny Belvin. I'm the Assistant Dean of Career Development for the Heller School, and also the host of this week's webcast. And I am honored to have with us today Michael Levine, who is the Senior Vice President for Learning and Impact at Noggin, a Nickelodeon brand. He is also a Heller School PhD graduate, class of 1985. And Michael has had a heck of a career, which has seen him at the New York Department of Education as its senior assistant to the chancellor, the Carnegie Corporation as its deputy chair and senior program officer. And can you tell me how to get to Sesame Street? He was there as the chief knowledge officer before coming to Nickelodeon. So Michael, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. How are you?
Well, Benny, it's a pleasure to be here. I think often about my friends and family who are based in the Boston area. Hope everyone is doing well.
Yes.
And I'm looking forward to seeing you all at the Heller School sometime in 2021.
You will have us. That's right. You will. Yeah.
But to answer your question, I'm doing as well as anyone can be doing during this extraordinary moment in sort of human history.
Yeah.
My family as well. The work I'm doing is important, and I'm, happy and privileged enough to be able to serve on numerous nonprofit and for-profit boards. And so I'm trying to do as much service as I can during these very, very difficult times. The twin pandemics of COVID and racial injustice, of course, are compelling me to do more. And so I look forward to having this conversation with you and also learning more about not just what other alums are doing, but what the current faculty and students of the Heller School are doing, because now's the time to take action.
That's right. And certainly we're excited you are engaging with us, and we look forward to having you engage for years going on. But before we get into that, so how do you go from the Heller School to Sesame Street to being the Senior VP of Learning Impact at Nickelodeon? So how do you do that? What was that like? What's that path?
Well, I am class of 85, so I am older. So I've had a long career at this point. So that's number one. It's a journey and it's stepwise. I like to call my career pathway a version of planned serendipity. In other words, Heller and my undergraduate career at Cornell did set me on a pathway where I had deep expertise in child development and in public policy and social impact. And that combination of expertises was super helpful in sort of spanning my career in government. First, when I was at Heller, I had an internship in the US Senate, and I also worked for the Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts. So that led me to my first job after I got my PhD, working for the mayor of New York. So I had the policy chops as well as the expertise in education and child development. But I was, able to learn about the job in the mayor's office, I think, through, an Heller alum.
What mayor was that? What mayor did you work for? I'm just curious.
Mayor Edward I. Koch.
Oh, Mayor Ed Koch, yes, yeah.
How am I doing, Ed Koch? It was really, quite an experience. I was one of a small number of staffers in the Office of Youth Services. And back in those days, Benny, the New York City Department of Education was, sort of connected to the mayor, but not controlled by the mayor.
Okay.
So the mayor helped to shape the Board of Ed, but did not have control of the Board of Ed. So it's a really interesting, experience. So I'll get into that later. But in terms of going from, graduate school when I was, in my mid-20s to, joining, world-class organizations like, Carnegie and Asia Society and Sesame and now Nickelodeon, it really was about having that deep content expertise and that knowledge of social impact and social policy that was, part of my, formal training as an undergrad and graduate school at Heller, but also being, I would sort of say, very, very open to building my networks from the first days, of my career. That is really looking outward and trying to, look at the real estate of a career as go to the place where you can have the most influence, even if it isn't the best job. I think, working for the mayor early on was a tremendous opportunity. It was a junior level post for someone with a PhD. I was an associate in the mayor's office of youth policy, but I was able to meet everybody. Everyone who was interested in school reform or in positive youth development or in creating, literacy campaigns were knocking on the mayor's door because it's a place of great influence and a place that controlled great resources. So rule one was deep content expertise and passion for justice.
Important, that's right. Yeah.
Impact. Rule two was go to places where you will have exposure to leadership. And rule three was sort of after I left the mayor's office was, take the networks that you're beginning to grow as a young person and fertilize them. Really continue to work on them, both at work but outside of work. Have lunch with someone. Follow up with people that you want to get to know informally. Write things. Become known as an expert by publishing. Put yourself in a position to create your own brand, if you will, so that you get known for having not only expertise but being a collaborative soul, someone who's interested in learning. Career development is a lifelong learning project. It also, for me, was go places that you can become more knowledgeable about the things that you're doing outside of work. So from the mayor's office to the Urban Coalition to the chancellor's office to Carnegie, those were my first 4 jobs. I was beginning to raise a young family. So where could I learn the most about raising a young family in terms of educational opportunity, in terms of parenting, in terms of child development? I just decided that that was my passion, and I would therefore, learn a lot on the job that I would bring to my family. I studied with the great scholars on brain development when I was at Carnegie. I learned about how to, design a new program for the most vulnerable kids, whether they were teen parents, which was what I studied for my PhD, or homeless families during, New York City's great homeless crisis, by being in a job where I had to learn from the best.
That's right. And I'm hearing the themes of networking and taking advantage of these opportune situations. And you certainly had a lot of those, the mayor's office, the Carnegie Corporation, the Asia Society. And in those, learning something new, such as you talked about your studies with brain development. So each step or each opportunity was a step to take you further, it sounds like. Here's a question that makes... Oh, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
No, it was. I mean, look, it's bumpy. I went to work for a Hollywood, media producer, Rob Reiner, and that was complicated. I was, sitting in New York, and I had an office in DC, and, all the media folks were out west, and that was hard to manage. And I didn't do a great job of, learning about how to blend cultures. And I learned what I was comfortable with.
Yeah.
And, like Hollywood wasn't the best thing for me, although, I also, have interesting, outside of work, relationships, which if, folks watching this, read the profile in the Heller, Alumni magazine about me from social policy to Sesame Street. My brother was married to a very prominent celebrity. So, it's also just your networks and your family really, kind of set you up. And I'm so aware, Benny, of how privileged and how much of an obligation and responsibility and a commitment that I have to do, with paying it full praise, but so much more of it was the reinforcement of Heller. Heller was a place that I went to instead of the Kennedy School because I didn't need to learn all the decision analysis and econometrics that they had at the K School. I needed to learn about the great inequities that exist in the world and social policy tools to address them. So for me, so much of this is mission.
Mission. And so let's let's hit on that, in thinking about the scope of your career and mission and your background. I mean, you grew up in a social justice family
Yeah.
and had a father or relatives that were deeply involved in the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
So how well, I should ask, did that influence your experience
Very
as
much.
you move forward to consider places like the Heller School and even some of the organizations that you previously worked at?
Unquestionably. I mean, you are what you were to some extent, and it's both a boon and a burden. We all have, families that are complicated. And my dad was, and still is alive, thank God. And my mom were very central influences in my career development. I mean, we were um, uh, raised by my mom's a clinician and expert on child development and family dynamics, and my dad organized states early in his career, and then ran something called the Institute on American Pluralism for the American Jewish Committee. He was bringing us to marches when I was, a little kid, March on Washington, a variety of different things, in the 60s and the 70s that was sort of, formative as I was growing up, first in the Midwest and then back in New York City. So yeah, my family is very, very influential. My dad, my brother's a prominent doc. My sister is, also involved in early childhood development and school reform. My wife is a philanthropy executive. So, I've surrounded myself and just been, super lucky to have surrounded myself with people who are, really socially impact oriented. The big thing when I was growing up was, my dad was involved in, conversations with leading civil rights, leaders. And so our phones were bugged, and like you'd get on the phone as a little kid and you could hear some static or things that were going on. And
Do something with that. Yeah, wow,
at
interesting.
one point, my sister, who's older than me, told me that she got on and some guy said, shit, it's the kid, on it. You ever heard the wiretaps were not as effective, back then. And I'll say, my dad was, prominent, but not super prominent in the civil rights, movement. He's sort of behind the scenes on many different things that, King and Jackson and Lewis and, others, did, Julian Bond and so on. But those were names in our household.
Yeah.
He was one of the leaders in Black Jewish relations, which were, strong and became, more stressed and more tense as time went on. And so it became, something that was sort of part of my DNA was to think about social justice. And when I selected early childhood development, so the next big influence, in my career, and a lot of this was based on my mom's influence on me in child development, was Uri Bronfenbrenner at Cornell, was the
Yeah.
leading developmentalist of the age, ecological systems theory. So as an undergraduate, I saw a notice for a course, which was, a graduate level course. I was a junior undergraduate, and I said, it was called Experiments in Real Life Situations. And so, myself and one other undergraduate joined a remarkable team of graduate students who were working for Uri Bronfenbrenner on a cross-national study that became world famous. And I just had the opportunity, because I was open to it, to sign up for a course which one other undergraduate, who's a friend of mine to this day, signed up for. So I guess those influences are really super important. And for those who don't have, families or, networks, it's, my obligation to respond. It's, part of what my mission in life is to be responsive to others who don't have the privileges that I had, growing up. But just to sort of recap, it's not all a straight line. I made plenty of mistakes in my career, and, I've had jobs that I didn't love. But in the main, if you, follow the rules of trying to position yourself to be in a mission-oriented organization that has world-class ambition, if not world-class standing, yet I highly recommend that. They say when you're looking for a house, location, location, location.
Yes.
There's, something about, getting to the right place at the right time. It's changing a little bit, Benny. The last thing I'll say about this is that because of the sort of, transformation in global organizations and the influence of digital, and we're seeing this during COVID, one person or three people or five people can really follow, Margaret Mead's words that to change the world really requires only a small group of passionate, committed people. So I'm not saying you have to join a big world-class organization, although I think that's a great place to get the kind of training and support that you need. But you do, need to pay attention to, as sort of a pivot to your next question, you got to pay attention to communications,
That's right.
digital, global. These are the transformative, zeitgeist of the time. So any career that you start now as a content expertise, you gotta know digital, you gotta know global.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. It was very insightful. So I want to ask another question related to career, but at a different level. An administrator, senior leadership, and you've seen these roles as senior vice president currently, deputy chair, senior program officer. Even if I think about my current role as a senior administrator, what skills, what characteristics, how does one prepare for that work? Is this something that develops gradually over time with experience? Yeah. Or is this something you can start to do now in order to at least be competent and before the learning shapes you further?
Yeah. So one thing that wasn't really evident at Heller when I was there in the 80s was it wasn't really organizational development / management oriented the way that it is now. And I sort of wish that I had more management training. So I was trained more as a staffer, as somebody, I worked for policymakers, so you staff them, right? Yes. I mean, I managed, departments as I got, older and more experienced, but there is something about organizational development and organizational change that is really an important part of the skill set at the beginning, and that I just had to assemble over time because I was trained as somebody who would just, jump in and, write a report or a brief or things like that. Like the policy analysis training really kicked in really early. Okay. The organizational development skills sort of took a lot of experience and training for me. And even now, I'm most comfortable managing smaller teams than running large, huge divisions. Yes. I just prefer to have that kind of intimate, contact and support. And so I would say that the most important thing, is to understand organizational life and organizational development, and to understand, management, tools which have to do with project management, as well as budget analysis. You can't get anywhere if you don't understand budgets. Yes. In nonprofit or, for-profit organizations. So one of the early experiences I had with the deputy chancellor in the New York City public schools is I became friendly with the deputy chancellor for finance for reasons that I don't even fully understand. We used to get into the office at 7:00 and we noticed each other. I was just a staff member to the chancellor and he was, senior to me, and he took me under his wing and I began to understand budget. Oh, so wow. You got to understand organizational development, dynamics, strategic planning, and budget. And now you must understand the science of diversity and inclusion. And so, things sort of pulled together just in the last, and part of this was sort of stimulated by what I said before, my dad's commitment to civil rights and the work that I did for the school's chancellor creating the first multicultural education policy. You gotta, and I'm not nearly as good as I need to be, and this is a big growth area for me now, is how do you manage a diverse and inclusive staff, and how do you recruit, talent from a global, talent pool, now, as opposed to how do I strengthen my network? I've been very network building oriented, but it's primarily white. Yeah. I mean, let me just be honest about that. And so how to, I work at this every single day, how to become somebody who's not, how should I put it, trapped by my habits, trapped by my networks, constantly trying to freshen up my perspective, based on other people's lived experiences.
And that's very insightful, connecting that to what senior managers have to manage today in the environment, as they should, which is a diverse career and senior workforce, the one thing that also stood out was you came in early, and this senior vice president or a senior administrator was there, and he took you under his wing. And
Yes.
so there's that initiative. Man,
That was before I was 30. So, I
that
mean,
before you
one of the other lessons for me was that I got my education out of the way early, which, you know, I was too, you know, full of myself to know what I didn't know. I probably should have waited, but I did have the advantage of having my PhD at 25, and therefore I could have so many different experiences after I had that kind of exit credential. So I've had, 35-year, career already, and still, have a lot of, growth possibilities.
So, Michael, this is completely off topic, but you played basketball
At Heller.
at Heller.
No, in high school too.
In high school. But I'm just curious where it happened at Heller.
Yeah, well, not in the hallowed Heller, auditorium or anything. But, no, we went down the hill, and a group of graduate students. I was really buddies with a lot of the history grad students.
Okay.
The beleaguered history grad students who, they had to spend 5-6 years getting their PhDs because their professors were, so that, they knew they were on the 6-year plan. So they convinced me that I could take an hour every day to play basketball, right?
Yeah,
So
wow.
we'd go down over the lunch hour, and a bunch of us would get together to play basketball. It's, really a fun, multi-racial, multidisciplinary, group of us who would go down there. And sometimes we would run into the Celtics, who used Heller's, the Rodman.
Yes, wow.
Center,
Wow, yeah.
for their practice, facility. So that was super fun. And then we had like graduate student / undergraduate student leagues. So I noticed who was good during the lunch hour. Some of them were students, some of them were employees, and we figured out how to create like a basketball team that had some. The Heller students weren't very good basketball players. I got some good height from Heller, I think. But no, we won a bunch of intramural league championships. So,
Okay.
and I have 3 kids, so and I've been a basketball fan all my life. I grew up as a Knicks fan back when they were good. And I became a coach for my 3 kids. So I was a basketball and a soccer. And so, having the time at Heller to learn more about basketball was great.
Oh, that's good. I mean, if there was a team now, they wouldn't call me. I was awful at basketball. And, everybody thought that, I could have been good, but I actually, and this is not even something I saw and repeating, but I actually did play briefly in high school and shot in the other.
You made a basket for the other team?
For the other team. I was right under the net.
Okay, that's okay. Like, famous people have done that. And somebody probably yelled at you, and that was a mistake.
Yeah, the whole team plus each other. The coach and my parents.
I'll tell you, Benny, it's not too late. And you've got 2 little ones, and you can turn them into whatever kind of a star you want.
Oh, they have to be better than me. So I have one last question.
Sure.
And this is more of a parting.
By the way, it's such a delight to talk to you. And for the Heller community, if you don't know Benny Belvin, you got to get to know this guy, man. I've had the pleasure of working with him when I was at Sesame, and I'm hoping to, work with the Heller community in my current role at, Viacom CBS. We've got a need for all sorts of, leaders who are communications leaders. So check Benny out.
Oh my God, I appreciate that. You are so kind. Even now, as we're trying to make sure students get more information about you. But, as we conclude, any last pieces of advice, any kernels of wisdom for students that are interested in leadership or working in a nonprofit organization or government organization?
Like any good relationship, it takes work. The career journey really is something that is so different than when I started out. Like when I started out, the expectation was you could join a company, you could join a concern, and you spend 5, 10, 12, 15 years. I had 10 years at Carnegie. I had 5 years at Asia Study, 12 years at Sesame Workshop in different roles and different growth. I mean, it's just a different world. So for those of you who are lucky enough or want to have those kind of long-term relationships, good luck. It may work, it may not. You constantly have to reinvent yourself. There is something about the brand, but the brand is not it. It's like find a group, and some of them will be your Heller colleagues and your fellow alums. Find a group of folks that you care about who are your kitchen cabinet, no matter what. They could be within your work environment, but they're the folks that you're relying on. They're like your work family. And you'll refresh and renew, but there's some people who are going to be with you along your career journey for a really long time. That's number one. Reach out. It's not just about, you don't have to do this yourself. That's number one. Number two, you're not going to have just one job. You're going to have several jobs. And not only that, it's going to be possible to have 2 or 3 hats at the same time, and not just as a consultant. Jobs are becoming much more fluid and permeable. And employers, I'm not saying you should double dip and have 2 full-time jobs. Please don't misunderstand me. Because I've read about people who are doing that now, during COVID. Don't do that. But I do think that folks are going to wear multiple hats.
Yes.
And one thing is going to be a board, and one thing is going to be a consultancy, and one thing is going to be the thing you do 60% of your time. So think about the new blends of talents and skills that you want to put together to be able to wear those multiple hats. And then finally, the only thing to get ready for in the new normal, which we're in, is expect the unexpected. Just be prepared. You got to be flexible. You got to, like if you're sad, you're out of work, you got to find a way to reframe your narrative, because there's going to be, I have had my share of bumps and bruises. That will be chapter 2 of this interview.
All right.
You can't be tender. You got to be ready and resilient. And Heller was a place that really did give you a skill set. Use it as a foundation for everything that follows. Thanks so much, Benny.
Michael, thank you. Michael Levine, again, everyone, is the Senior Vice President of Learning and Impact for Noggin, a Nickelodeon brand. And he's also a 1985 graduate of the Heller PhD program. It's been such a pleasure. Your insight, your wisdom. We definitely will have you back, so stick around.
On campus. I haven't been for a long time. By the way, I got married on campus, so I should have told that whole story.
That is. And that happens. I mean, that is really, we've had students that, I think, see, that's why Heller is such a special place, and we certainly appreciate you and your willingness to continue to be a part of the community.
My pleasure, Benny. Best to everybody over there. Please stay safe and take good care.
Thank you, and we'll see you on the next Alumni Career Cast.